It is Drake May Monday as we record this episode. This team in red made me super happy this weekend. My other team in red, not so much this year. However, 2026 is bringing along a huge undertaking in regulations for F1. We have all new Aero, all new engine updates, and all the teams are going to have a shot at the trophy. We have to break it all down for you guys. Welcome back to the 305K. Jackson and I are here. This is going to be a pretty technical episode. We have a lot to talk about with the new
Yeah.
regulations. There's a whole new overhaul of aerodynamics and the engines, super big updates, and we're going to go into all of them. So, the big stats are we're going to have smaller cars, narrower. It's gone from 2,000 millimeters to 1,900 millimeters, which doesn't sound like a huge change, but on track, that does make a difference. They're going to be
Mhm.
shorter cars, they're going to be nimbler cars. There's less in terms of aerodynamic updates on the floors. They're going to be a little bit simpler, which means that a lot more is going to be focused on the front wings and the rear wings. Um, one of the big things is there is a shorter wheelbase, which is the distance between the two wheels from front to back, which is why we have smaller cars. We're going to see higher ride heights, interestingly, which means that the drivers are a little bit further off the ground. It means that the noses of the cars are going to be a little bit more steep going towards the front. Um, and contributing to the thinness of the cars, the tires are going to be thinner. And we're going to lose the wheel caps over the front wheels. So in the 2022 to 2025 cars, there were little caps over the front wheels. That's gone, which is going to make these cars lighter. It's going to contribute to how teams are going to approach aerodynamics. But the front wing is the real delta. There's no beam on the rear wings, which is on the bottom, which means that a lot of the airflow is going to continue through the car. But like I said, the big story is the front wing, which is now going to have a new thing, which is active Aero, which means that these wings are going to open up in the straights, a lot like DRS.
Mhm.
Um, you can open them up whether you're within a second of the car in front or not. And it's going to allow the cars to go a lot faster on straights while maintaining the same downforce into corners. And it provides a big challenge for teams as, they always try and get the cars as light as possible. They always try and get the cars to be, you know, as much downforce while maintaining low amounts of drag coming at the cars. But this provides a new ground floor for the teams to start working from.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot of the changes are also going to provide more opportunities for like separation between the drivers in terms of skill. I think we're going to see like a big like noticeability in like which drivers really have great racecraft, which know how to use the new cars because like it might be a season in where some of these cars are close, but like it might could really come down to the
Yeah.
driver in those cars. And it's one, we've said it a million times, it's exciting. There's a lot of
Hmm.
difference and also simplicity in what's coming. I think
Yeah.
in a sense we're gonna like for the newer F1 fans, it's gonna be a bit easier to know what's going on. um
Hmm.
I'll get into that in a bit with the new changing of DRS because I personally don't really like it because there's simpler names that feel like, well, yeah, it's exactly
Yeah.
what it is. So
Uh-huh. With the big thing is that we weren't really sure how these cars were going to look. They give kind of a technical layout. They give an example car, the FIA. They gave it near the end of last year. We've had plenty of time to look at it, but it's really not indicative of what the teams are actually going to put out at winter testing or in the first race in Australia. It's really hard to tell because, that's kind of the framework, and all the teams are trying to work within the framework while getting kind of as far as they can without
yeah.
getting chastised for it. Um, so it was really telling when we saw a little bit of footage of the Cadillac car out. We also saw the reveal of the RB and the Red Bull cars, which once again has to be taken with a grain of salt because obviously they're not going to put all of their technical accomplishments out on display for other teams to look at, on Instagram. Um,
Yeah.
but it is going to show us a little bit of what's to come, and I will get into that later. But first, we should talk about the big updates in terms of battery and overtaking, because I think that's going to be the most obvious thing to many fans and what the difference is between the 2 years in terms of watching the races.
Yeah, you're gonna hear terms, and you're used to hearing this term of activating your DRS, multiple DRS points on a track. That's no more. You got overtake mode now, which I was mentioning, I like the term
Sounds like a video
DRS.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, it just, it's like, oh, yeah, click overtake mode. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, you used to hear overtake available. So now it's like, what does that mean? So the main thing about overtake mode, it replaces DRS. It was previously known actually as manual override mode. Um,
Hmm.
so there's now with old DRS, there used to be multiple activation points, and you could use it multiple times during a lap. Maybe like besides Monaco or another track, maybe where
Yeah.
there was one on the
Imola
main
has one
straight.
DRS straight. Yeah.
Imola too. There's one activation point which we don't know where it's going to be on the track, but if you're within 1 second of the car, you get your overtake mode, and it can either be used in one straight for the entire straight, because for certain tracks like Vegas, you didn't have the entire strip to use DRS because it would be completely overpowered. You had to shorten it. Now you could save your overtake mode and use it for a bit longer, and but then you wouldn't have it for the rest of the lap. It's just
Hmm.
something that when I talk about the racecraft becoming clear, drivers that know how to use their overtake mode properly will have a severe advantage over the rest of the field. And
Yeah.
there's some sort of strategy that comes with it too.
Yeah, it definitely brings in another kind of variable to these drivers, and there's a lot to think about, and they're also going to have a lot going on with their steering wheel with the active Aero, which they're going to need to be flipping on and off through corners and straights, even more so than they did with DRS. This is the push to pass overtake button is something that F Formula E has actually used, and I've seen it in action there. And I'm not a huge fan of it either. It does seem a little bit overpowered in the moment, but at the same time, it doesn't last as long, at least in Formula E. Um, in general, I think that these cars are well equipped for overtaking and for battle more than the ground effect 2022 to 2025 cars were, because they're smaller, they're more nimble through corners. Hopefully, they're able to follow in dirty air, which was the real issue
Yeah,
um, in past generations. But it's really concerning for me that I don't think that DRS was the problem and something that needs to be
no.
replaced. Um, Maybe this is just going to be, same thing under a different name, and we're going to see the same kind of racing, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This is a stupid reference to make, but in the NFL, like last year, they implemented their new kickoff rule and they made the touchback go from the 25 to the 30. People still kept kicking it out,
Yeah.
like for touchbacks. Like, for all we know, it might just be, as he said, the exact same thing. So, another thing they added, it's called boost mode. It was almost formerly like known as like an overtake mode. Whenever you want to activate like your max amount of energy, to like make a
Hmm.
pass. Like you always hear in Drive to Survive, they're like, all right, max the overtake is available or something. So
Yeah.
it's like it's
Yeah,
just
it's
to
about
like
adding
put it
power to
simple,
the
it's just getting the max amount of power wherever you need it on track. Most likely for overtakes, we might see some defensive like ability
yeah.
with it potentially.
Yeah, I think, well, I kind of have to lead into what the engine changes are because there is a pretty decent update on extra energy and what it means. So I have kind of notes here, but it's relatively technical stuff, and some of this is more jargon than anything else. But we're still working with 1.6 liter engines. It's still a V6 turbo hybrid, which means that it's balanced between petrol, gasoline, and electrical energy. The big difference is, and this is kind of what causes the other changes in the engine. But the big difference is that they're shifting from what used to be about an 80% gas engine and 20% electrical engine to about a 50-50 split. And this is mostly because F1 is trying to go carbon neutral in 2030. So they're trying to get as much electrical energy as they can. Um, what that does mean is that we will see easier electrical recharge in the battery, which
Yep.
means that, I think it's about twice as fast. They're expecting battery recharge to happen, which will be interesting because we'll see more power. Um, Along with this, it means that there's less requirement for cooling because of less gas. So the
Mm,
minimum weight has been increased, though, which means that, like I said, like I will say, excuse me, there's lots of stuff that's going on with the engines, and Ferrari has actually changed a huge strategy, which has to pay off at this point
it,
because it's been so long. I mean,
Oh,
some things
yeah,
got to
it
work,
has.
some things got to
Something's got
give.
to get. Something's got to give. Exactly.
Someone's got to listen to my prayers. But the other big thing from this is they've gotten rid of a major component of the engine, which is the MGU-H, which was uh, a store of energy that was achieved from the exhaust from the cars, and it's for heat recovery. So that's why it's the H is for heat recovery. Um, it was effective in the old cars, but it was a really complicated system, and importantly, it's not something that's used in road cars. So all these manufacturers for the engines didn't really have the will to kind of pursue this component because it's not something that like was applicable anywhere else besides F1. And
Mhm.
obviously they have money to throw into this, but they'd like to have, they have a say in all these rules. They would
Yeah.
like to have some amount of, application of this outside of just F1. So with that, the MGUK, which has already existed in these cars, becomes more important, and that is getting energy harvested from braking within the corners. Um, and this is where I kind of get into the jargon. I'm not going to act like I'm an expert on all this. I kind of
Yeah.
just
No,
kind of
this
talking
is.
out of my ass. But it's last year there was 120,000 kilowatts of energy coming from the MGUK, and this year there's going to be an estimated 350,000
Oh
kilowatts, which
well.
is just about three times. Um, and I don't know why they decided to do 350,000 kilowatts instead of like 300 or like 3.5 nanowatts, or I don't know. I feel like there's an easier unit of measure there.
You're speaking of the wrong person. I do not know
I'm like,
anything when it comes to that.
I did a quick like study of all this, and I think I learned about as much as I did in ninth grade bio. So, the other
That
thing
class
is
sucked.
it was awful. So the other thing is they're using advanced sustainable fuels, which they
Yeah, I was
have
going to
done in the
mention
past,
that.
I believe. But this is,
It's
there's a lot of
100%
talk.
sustainable. It's 100%
Exactly. There's
sustainable.
there's a lot of talk about them going to sustainable fuels and being carbon neutral by 2030. So one of the big things, and not necessarily in terms of the regulations, but one of the things that's been explored, there has been a difference in the compression ratio in the engine, which has gone from 18 to 16. And this is one that I was like, I feel like I need to kind of learn what I'm talking about. So I have a little bit of a diagram here. Um, so
Oh, that
in the
needs to come into
pistons
focus. There it goes.
in
Wait.
the engine, we have this, which is the piston, right? You have, I've
Tucker, that's
labeled
like
it
not really
as,
in focus.
I'll try my best here. It's labeled as VD or VB. Let me see what I labeled as. Yes, VD. All right, VD and then VC. So when the piston goes down, you have a certain amount of volume here, and then when it's back up, you have this amount of volume. So under these new regulations, the volume of the total area
Is a
here,
math equation?
the ratio between this and this has to be 18 at maximum 16 to 1, which is down from 18 to 1 from last year. However, the ratio being greater is more optimal, I suppose. Like I said, I'm kind of just learning this, so this isn't like an expert lesson, but this ratio of VA, I labeled it, but this whole thing to this has to be at most 16 to 1 when it's measured by the FIA
Okay.
in what they called, I think, ambient temperatures, which is like room temperature. So after the race, everything's cooled
Mm-hmm.
down. They'll measure that volume difference.
Okay.
But when you have something like this, when it's heated up, obviously you can have different temperatures, and Mercedes and then Red Bull by extension, who, hired a lot of ex Mercedes employees who kind of gave them the secret. Um, they put a material here or here that expands when heated and when the pressure is greater. So when this is pressed
Oh.
in, this volume decreases. And so the ratio between this to this is more like 18 to 1. So
So
they managed to
if
make it so that it's relatively the same as last year in terms of that power, which is a huge advantage. The numbers
mhm,
that we were seeing were up
three
to
tenths,
four
when
tenths per lap, I think,
it
even.
goes through, yeah, 3 to 4 tenths of the lap. And if that's the case, that's six teams on the grid that are going to have a significant advantage than the
Yes.
others.
Um,
Because obviously,
mhm.
as we've previously mentioned, like Mercedes is going to supply four teams. They're going to have themselves, Williams, McLaren, and Aston Martin. And Red Bull are going to have themselves, Alpha Tower, or wow, V Carb.
Yeah,
And
same
then
thing.
do they have Alpine this year, or is that next year? I
Um,
want to
I
say they
spent so
have
much time
Alpine
studying for
as
this, I
well.
don't remember. Yeah,
Um,
but it is a huge advantage, and for teams lower down the order that might not have as good aerodynamics, it could be a huge advantage in the midfield fight. I also did want to point out
oh,
we're talking about a
Alpine
difference of
is Mercedes.
that's what it is. 16 to 18 is the difference that we're looking at. Most road cars, that you're driving, are around 6 to 1 is the ratio. So it's
Oh my.
a lot less power going on those. Um, but what I will say is there has been some amount of talk about this from the Red Bull side where they're saying, don't believe the hype. It's not as big of a thing as you think it is. And maybe even saying that Mercedes are talking because they don't have anything to talk about because they're actually behind. So you kind of have to take all this with a grain of salt. You kind of have to understand that there's a lot of time to go and there's a lot of things that happen here. So
The thing
this is
that
the
needs to be
engine.
understood is we're not gonna know anything until I
Hmm.
think the first, at least the first practice
Yeah.
session in Australia.
Well, yes, I can tell you something. I can flash back to last year when we had preseason testing and I was watching it, all 6 hours of it, or not all 6 hours of it, but a good amount of the 6 hours of it on
Mhm,
my phone. And Ferrari obviously had very high expectations going into that season, changed up a lot of things. But by the end of day two, you could see that those long runs just weren't looking as good. And, I was kind of coping, but I think it was sandbagging, whatever. You had analysts kind of saying maybe it's not their true pace, but you could kind of tell that it wasn't there. Um,
mhm.
and before that, it was all just shots in the dark. You can only really tell when you get on track. And some of
Yeah,
these teams, I think, are in a situation where they might not even be on track in the first day of
yeah,
testing,
I
which would
saw
be
that.
very interesting to see. But it's important to recognize, and there's a lot of different things that go into this. Like for example, there are teams that have found minimum weight, so they've gotten down to the minimum weight of the cars, and that's worth a tenth or two. But for the most part, those are like I saw it with Alpine. I think I saw it with Audi. It's not necessarily like going to be a huge difference. And if other teams are not there by the start of the season, they'll probably be there by race four, by China or Bahrain or something like that. So it's not going to be that big of a difference, and that kind of thing. And like I said, there's a lot of different things that go in. Another one that came out in the news and was getting a lot of attention is Ferrari switched the material in their engine. So same thing. Um, Same thing with the pistons. It's the same part of the engine. But instead of using aluminum, which every team has used for the past, I think, decade or so because
Yeah.
it's lighter, it's very easy to use. They've switched to steel, which is heavier, but like I said earlier, there's a higher minimum weight in the engine, so it's not as big of an effect on the importance because they have to reach a certain threshold in the weight, anyways. And at the same time, it can withstand higher heat, higher pressure, and it's likely going to be more reliable. I wrote that it has a lower expansion ratio, which is very important.
Mhm.
And you should look that one up because I have no idea what that means. I probably should have figured it out. But one of the big things is that it should be more reliable. And for Ferrari, if we go back to
They need
2022,
reliability.
that was their biggest issue. So it's not surprising that they're going after it this time. And yeah, who knows? Maybe
Who
it'll work.
knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's just kind of interesting that we'll see is like there will be issues at the start of this season. Like the first couple races could go almost any
Yeah.
way possible.
Yeah.
Even in the like when in 2022, whenever the new regs got released, there was a big problem with porpoising.
Hmm.
Problem with porpoising. That's like a whole alliteration. But porpoising, if, for those who don't know, is basically just a car bumping up and down really hard on the
Yep.
ground. And there was a severe problem with it in almost all of the
Hmm.
cars. So
Yep.
we could very well see something similar to that
Yeah.
because
It's
it just
it's a
doesn't
lot
seem
of
like the teams have it figured out.
Yeah, it's a lot of addressing problems. And I think one of the things with the new regs is addressing that problem as a whole. The cars have less of they're riding a little bit higher, which means
Yeah.
should avoid a little bit of that problem. Another big thing that I wanted to talk about, that we're seeing with these cars now that we're seeing them on track. Audi, there have been clips of them running their actual car on track in an all black livery. So it's really hard to tell, but you can see some things. Um, V-Carb and Red Bull obviously released their cars, released their liveries, in a
Mhm.
new car. on their social media, which you can get a little bit from probably the general layout of the car, but
Yeah.
not like specific stuff. But you can see how the regs are working. So I did want to talk about the front wing, which is different this year. It's going to have that active arrow, so it's going to be able to flip from being down to opening up.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the interesting things between the two different Red Bull cars, the V Carb and the Red Bull, is the V Carb had two separate. Um, I don't know what the technical term is, but on the rear wing of the old cars, they would have something that would it looks like about an L shape, and it would flip open the DRS. And on
Mhm.
the Red Bull car, they have one of those in the middle of the front wing, and on the V carb, they have two on either side, which is
Mhm.
a little bit of a difference. The main thing is that having two obviously messes with your aerodynamics on both sides, but the one in the middle is interesting because it messes with the aerodynamics of the front wing, which is now disconnected from the nose, whereas you used to have like a flat nose going straight into the front wing. Now it's taken off and connected on the sides. So there is airflow through the middle that's kind of being blocked by having your DRS opener there. Um, I also said before these cars have had high noses, which is interesting. It means that the ride height is kind of pushed, or the ride is pushed a little bit forward. It means that you're a little bit more compressed, but it does have that high nose. The end plates on the front wing are also moved in. In the last edition of the cars, the front wing was straight out, and then at the very ends there were the end plates. This looks a little bit more like the car you might have seen in 2021. If you watch those highlights from
Mhm.
Abu Dhabi, where at the end there's the end plate, and then there's a little bit sticking out past that. And we've seen a few different designs. The RB that they released had a little bit down and then a little kick up. The Red Bull actually had that and then a little kick down. So we'll see how
Mhm.
complicated teams get with that. Obviously, you can get more complicated, increase the downforce, but at the same time, brings the weight up. So there's always that kind of balance between the two sides. Um, and then a little bit of a surprise from what I saw, from what I understand, all three cars that we've seen, the Audi, the V Carb, and the Red Bull, have had push suspension, which, if you don't know, there are two main types of suspension on the front wheels of the car. Um, One of them is push rod, so it means that the car pushes out against the wheel to turn it out, or pushes out to turn it, either way. And I think there was a decent expectation that most teams were going to be going for pull suspension because it would
Mhm.
have a nicer effect on the Aero, considering there was no rear skid block. Like I said, this is more technical than I'm kind of up to date with.
Yeah.
But that's another thing to look out for is which teams are going to have push suspension, which teams are going to have pull suspension. There's also still these wide side pods that we used to have, but they kind of mellow out as opposed to the Ferrari had these like big, pretty much gills on the side of their car.
Yeah.
And from what we're seeing so far, you still have the same side pods, but the side of the car kind of mellows out as it goes back. So there's a lot of technical things that go into it, and I've kind of
Yeah.
gone on a monologue and a lecture here, which is not what I wanted to do. But
Yeah. This is.
there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and it's one of the great things about F1 that you've got these
Yeah.
drivers fighting it out on track, and you have the people in the factories fighting it out behind them, which is
Yeah.
almost as if not more important. And
No, it is more. It's more important.
mhm,
It's a
it
hundred percent
brings
more
it
important.
brings us to what will be a spectacular,
Season.
if you're up for it, time to watch at winter testing, which we'll obviously have to break down when it happens
Yeah.
in February. I must say, not a lot of people are going to watch, the 5 hour sessions. I will, we will, we'll have it all
We
guys.
will.
But, it's a lot of time on track, but it's a lot of time to see how the cars work and see which teams are going to go out there and say, this, and this we can improve on and be able to make those changes to the car and get it ready for Melbourne.
The question is like, so a common term that we'll use, I'm sure, a lot during testing is sandbagging, which is basically, as it sounds like, you're kind of like not showing your full potential.
Yeah.
And the question is, will like teams sandbag because I feel like in a sense
Yeah.
they're going to need to know what they have.
So, yeah, so the interesting thing with that is that there's a lot of ways to sandbag. But one of the common ones is just bringing up the weight of your car, riding
Mm,
more fuel
okay.
than necessary. And that's something that the teams can kind of control and also be able to measure quantitatively, so
Hmm.
they can say, we have this much fuel in our tank that's contributing to this many tenths per lap. And the only thing that gets in the way of is, drivers who are in the car for the first time. If they're running a full tank of fuel, that car is going to feel like a boat. It's going to be sluggish. They're going to be, driving an Atlantic cruise with 400 people on board behind them and trying to get around these corners. Whereas,
Yeah.
a light fuel load, they feel like they're in an F1 car. So
Mhm.
it's a lot about getting the car ready. I think we're not going to see quite as much sandbagging this year just because it's new regulations.
Yeah.
And not only do we have these cars getting ready to be on track, but we have drivers who have to get to know these cars. It's
Yeah.
not a small task to adjust to this new car that is coming out of the factory that you've probably ridden in twice, maybe
Hmm.
not even.
Yeah. Maybe.
Um,
Maybe.
so I think there's those two battles happening between the car and the team and the driver and the car. So it's something that's,
Yeah.
kind of going back and forth. Um, like I said, this is going to be a lot about adjusting. These cars that they're going to put out last year, they put these cars and they kind of know where they are, and they kind of
Hmm.
know where they're going to be. They're putting this car out, and I think that we're going to see a difference of probably upwards of 2 or 3 tenths between the start of winter testing and Melbourne, which is a pretty
Yeah.
huge difference
Yeah.
that these teams are
Absolutely.
going to have to adjust to.
Yeah. It'll be fascinating to see how these cars work. I don't. It's not gonna be perfect. I think that's what like if you're still here, which obviously we appreciate you being watching us just absolutely ramble about these new regulations, but like
Hmm.
it's not gonna be perfect.
Yeah,
There's gonna be a lot of mistakes from teams. Teams are gonna have engine problems. They're gonna be
yeah,
driver issues, couple crashes for all we know, even during testing. So it'll just be very interesting to see how the drivers and teams adjust and what's been
yeah,
put into work for probably the past at least 2 years. Like they've been working on this car for a while, and yet they still
yeah,
don't know what they're getting. So
yeah. It's obviously a big fight, and we're gonna have to be on alert for which teams are looking better, and at the same time not overreacting, which is hard to do when you're
it's
trying to come
so
up with
different.
ticks.
It's gonna be so difficult.
So we're counting down the days. We're getting ever closer, and we're going to start seeing these cars reveal and be able to talk a little bit about what the differences are. But most importantly, you got to mark your calendar for winter testing, which
Yeah,
is usually a decently big deal. But this year it is a huge deal because these teams are going to have to, they're going to be watching this so closely. And, as
yeah,
fans, there's a lot that can go wrong and there's a lot that can go right in these days. So
yeah,
we will break that down like a race when it happens because
yeah,
there's so much
definitely,
to take from it. So
absolutely.
thank
It'll
you
be
guys
fun.
for watching again. Obviously, we aren't getting that many episodes out compared to during the season just because there isn't that much to talk about. But we're still, we have a lot to go over and we have gone over it. So it's great to be back. I think Jackson and we didn't have school today, but I kind of gave him a good lecture. So um, I'm going to give him homework on it and the test is next week. So thank you guys for watching and we will see you next time.